Olá, pessoal, bom dia de novo. A gente está aqui dando continuidade ao nosso evento, em homenagem ao Jair e à Ruth, e hoje nós temos mais uma convidada especial, que é a Sonia Cyrino, que foi nossa homenageada na edição passada. Sônia, bem-vinda. Muito obrigado por estar aqui participando com a gente. Como sempre, a Sônia sempre está presente nos nossos eventos, colaborando sempre conosco. Vou te passar a palavra para você falar um pouco sobre o seu trabalho, que é sempre muito relevante para os estudos gerativistas no Brasil e para a teoria gramatical em geral. Muito obrigado, Sônia.
Muito obrigada, Felipe. Eu queria primeiro começar agradecendo ao Felipe pelo convite, né, de participar dessa homenagem super merecida para o Jair e para a Ruth, dos colegas de longa data. Como o Jairo falou na fala dele, nós, né, nos conhecemos há muitos anos atrás, quando eu estava começando o meu doutorado, e ele também, nós compartilhamos uma disciplina antes de ele ir para Maryland, e também quando eu fui para Maryland em fazer o sanduíche, né, tivemos também esse ano de compartilhar ideias, e ele sempre muito atencioso, muito generoso, como todos conhecem. A Ruth também, minha colega né, da Unicamp, nós sempre, como ela falou, em Taubaté, eu nem me lembrava, né, que em Taubaté, lembrava do nosso encontro em Taubaté, mas não me lembrava do que a gente tinha conversado, e desde lá sempre nos mantemos em contato e fazendo parcerias, uma grande e querida amiga. Então, como todos, né, conhecem o trabalho de todos, não preciso, né, falar, eu agradeço muito e acho que é a homenagem é muito merecida. Então, vou começar apresentando hoje um trabalho que eu tenho desenvolvido, comecei a desenvolver recentemente, no ano passado, e então já digo que não vou ter nenhuma proposta definitiva, mas assim, algumas ideias que eu estou desenvolvendo, e agradeço pelo feedback que vocês poderão dar. Eu vou falar em inglês, porque os slides são em inglês, e assim como a Ana Maria, eu creio que eu vou mais rápido se eu falar em inglês, como está nos slides, mas qualquer pergunta pode ser feita em português, claro. Okay, so I'm going to talk about negation in Brazilian Portuguese this recent research that I did.
Slide, não?
Não, vou passar. Tá passando?
Não.
Por que não? Por que não?
Agora passou.
Okay. Yeah. Okay, so it has been shown in several works that Brazilian Portuguese has three positions for the negative word não in sentential negation in Brazilian Portuguese. For example, in one, I have eu não comi o chocolate, eu não comi o chocolate não, ou comi o chocolate não. Number 1A is the unmarked form of sentential negation, and according to the literature, 1B and 1C are more related to pragmatic or discursive functions. For example, in 2, if there was a chocolate on the table, everybody looks at Pedro, who is a chocolate addict, implying he is the one who has eaten it. He says, eu não comi chocolate não. Eu não comi o chocolate não. This has a reinforcing function, it negates a presupposition. Now, as in 3, if you have a context where somebody is asking, did you eat the chocolate that was here? And the person asks, comi não, or não. This não is related to the anaphoric negator não, and it implies a contradiction of a presupposition inferable from the discourse, and this is more common in the northeast of Brazil. But more recently, and I have seen this since 2010, there is another position for the negative word não that has been noted in the literature, and this is não is possible in the slot between an auxiliary and an infinity or non-finite verb, as we see in 4. Antes eu não via a TV aberta, e agora vou não ver a TV digital aberta. Minha conexão é discada, e eu estou não trabalhando com meu servidor. Eu posso almoçar mais tarde. Tenho não feito as refeições estes dias. So the question that I want to pursue is, what is the position and what are the properties of this new type of negation in Brazilian Portuguese? So first I'm going to show some data on these new forms. Then I'm going to talk something that has been in the literature, which is called inhibited individualities. Then I'm going to look at the properties of low noun, or this new noun, imperfective and progressive periphrasis. And then I'll explore 4 positions for negation, and then the potential negation positions for this low noun in Brazilian Portuguese, and then I will come to the conclusion. So we begin with data. So when we have this perfective periphrasis there, noun plus verb in the participle, we have some examples from Google. Tenho não vivido minha melhor versão há alguns dias. Ou, ele está fazendo o que tinha não feito antes. Estou não vendo a resposta e terei que acionar os meios judiciais. So this sentence is in the context of someone that is in the site Reclame Aqui, where she's complaining about something that didn't work, and she doesn't have any answers, so this is what she says. Then, the number 8. Não solicitei a troca porque já estava não gostando do atendimento. So this is in a restaurant when the person didn't like the dish, something was wrong with the dish, and then he didn't ask for the exchange, the replacement, because he already já estava não gostando do atendimento e deixou para lá. And then also with the infinitive and the ir, vou não fazer o acordo e fingir que não vi isso. Como eu vou não gostar de gordinho? Meu trabalho depende deles. Okay, so before we talk about this, let's talk about this work that has been in the literature more recently by Fábregas and González Rodrigues, and they discuss this as low negation, but the discussion about inhibited eventualities has been longer in the literature. But I'm going to focus on Fábregas and González Rodrigues' proposal, because the structure with Brazilian Portuguese new noun, which I will call low noun, resembles what they have been studying. For them, inhibited eventualities is when the negation does not scope over the event as an object with time and world parameters, but over the description denoted by the lexical predicate which is conveyed in the event. So they propose that inhibited eventualities readings are different from negated event readings or standard sentential negation. Standard sentential negation denies the existence of an eventuality and would have a structure like 11b for a sentence as 11a. So if you have no puedes hablar, this is a standard sentential negation, negation would be above TP. But in inhibited eventualities, negation is introduced, according to them, below VP or event P, if you assume a Ramshan 2008 and 2018 as they do, and operates on the descriptive content of the event. So if you have puedes no hablar, which is, for them is inhibited eventuality, the structure, you would have now the negation below the event P or VP. Now they concentrate on Spanish, and they show that inhibited eventualities are possible when you have negation plus a verb in the infinitive form, such as the structures as I'm going to show here, and I'm translating B in Portuguese. For example, when you have a modal plus a verb in the infinitive, puedes no hablar, pode não pagar, puedes não chover, pode não chover, puedes não pagar impostos, não pode não pagar impostos. Or in some aspectual periphrases, for example, with empezar, empezou a não fumar, ou começou a não fumar. In infinitive, in subject clauses, no vender casas é lo que hizo durante um ano, não vender casas é o que fiz durante um ano. Or when you have the complements, events in the as complements of perception verbs. For example, Juan la viu no obedecer. João viu ela não obedecer, in a context where the mother is asking Mary to obey and she doesn't, and her brother João viu ela não obedecer. Now, as for periphrases, they analyze only aspectual periphrastic structures that contain a negative trigger inside them in Spanish. So, aspectual auxiliary with no, and then with the verb in the gerúndio or infinitivo. So, these are the possibilities in Spanish. The periphrases with gerúndio, you can have comenzó no respondiendo, empezó no respondiendo, continuó no diciendo la verdad, terminó no votando en contra, sigue no queriendo verme. Now, these are all possible in Portuguese, right? Now, no in progressive periphrasis, however, is ungrammatical in Spanish. So, crucially, this is possible for Brazilian Portuguese. So we cannot say está no comiendo in Spanish, but as we've seen in the examples, we can do this in Brazilian Portuguese. Now, as I said before, temporal or aspectual periphrases with infinitives are possible with some of them, some of these periphrases, like with em pessoa no pagar impostos. Now, as with respect to prospective periphrases with ir plus infinitive, you cannot have this in Spanish, as you can see below here, vá no correr, vá no pagar, is impossible. But in Brazilian Portuguese, this is possible. For example, in 20, amanhã vou não correr sozinha. Now, interestingly, this is the hallmark of inhibited eventualities for Fábricas and González Rodrigues is the non-dynamicity of the complement. But notice that in the sentence in 20, which is possible in Brazilian Portuguese, the verb correr is not stative, it's dynamic, right? It's an activity. So this is the first sign that the low noun in Brazilian Portuguese seems to be a different phenomenon from what is possible in Spanish. In other words, Brazilian Portuguese has inhibited eventualities, as we have seen, because all of those are possible. But what we see in the constructions that I focus on this presentation is a different phenomenon. So in this presentation, I will concentrate on structures that are possible in Brazilian Portuguese but are totally impossible in Spanish and other Romance languages as far as I know. So I'm going to discuss when noun appears in perfect and in progressive periphrases, because the intervening low negation in prospective or infinitive periphrases are possible, as we saw before, but this is the focus of another paper because we have to study more deeply these periphrases, this prospectual and aspectual periphrases, because there are properties that are related to their syntax and semantics, apart from the possibility of negation in Brazilian Portuguese. But for example, in Spanish or in European Portuguese, you have the preposition estou a, vou, vá a llover, como eu vi aqui, vá a correr, vá a apagar, ou estou a correr, estou a apagar, that deserve further scrutiny. So what about ter plus noun participle and star plus noun gerund? Are they inhibited eventualities? They assume an event semantics account, according to Ransham and Zenonius 2014 and Ransham 2018, where the clauses fine is divided in 3 domains: propositions, situations, and events. The lower domain is where the event P is built, which corresponds more or less to the BP, and it's crucial for them, for their analysis of inhibited eventualities, that any event descriptions that lacks an initiator will not be able to trigger the negative event reading. So if you have an initiator in the event P, then you cannot have an inhibited eventuality reading. So here, for example, you have the initiator phrase here, and they say this is the only possibility when you have an inhibited eventuality, because when you have an inhibited eventuality, you are denying the head initiator. And this produces an entailment that the initiator sub-event, which is identified by the lexical verb, is not an initiating event or verb event, but an initiating, but an inhibiting is not correct that, an inhibiting verb event. Now, so they show this because in Spanish verbs that allow causativization, inhibited eventualities are ungrammatical with incoative reading. So you cannot have vi la leche no hervir, intending that I saw the milk did not boil. You can only have vi la matrona no hervir la leche, when you have then an initiator, which is la matrona. But in Brazilian Portuguese, 24 is good. Vi o leite não ferver e ficar talhado. And in fact, there are several examples of this low noun with an accusative verbs in structures with there plus participle and star plus gerund, which are the ones that I'm considering here, showing that low noun may be above process P, so showing that low noun doesn't require an initiator, let's say. So, for example, with there plus participle, Assim, o site da Total Acesso ter não caído ainda. Só dele ter não caído já é uma vitória. So we are talking about the site, right? O melhor é que depois de eu perder, eu penso na forma mais besta de como eu poderia ter não morrido. They are talking about some video game. Não teve um dia que eu não tenha não chegado atrasada nessa aula. So, he always arrives late. With the Star Wars Gerald, it's the same thing. Naquela hora você disse, mamãe, estou não morrendo agora. So this was uttered in the context of a religious session. A corrupção praticada por gestores municipais no estado do Ceará está não chegando ao fim. So this is from a newspaper, and the person is talking about the corruption in Ceará. Pulou o muro quando o muro já estava não caindo. Which is strange, but anyway, this is what we found in Twitter. Now, low não is also possible with passives, like in the sentences. Os patologistas usam a palavra negativa para significar que algo foi não visto na amostra de tecido. O livro é famoso por ser não lido. Já ouvi um bando de gente falando, só consegui chegar até a cena do barco. And also a mix of periphrases and passive. Não entendo porque o Gustavo está sendo não punido. And even between the two auxiliaries. E está não sendo decidida em parlamento também, não acho. Something that should be decided in the parliament. Isso é balera até uma criança bem... Isso é balera. Até uma criança bem instruída consegue saber distinguir a lei que está não sendo cumprida. So the conclusion for now, in conclusion, is that slow não does not seem to constitute the same kind of phenomenon that has been known as inhibited eventualities in the literature. Maybe Brazilian Portuguese has those kinds of things, but this is a different thing. Prospective and aspectual peripheries may do so, but their interaction with low negation is under investigation. Now, so the question is, what are the syntactic properties and the position for low now in perfect and progressive peripheries? So let's look first at some properties. First, low noun does not correspond to sentential negation because it doesn't seem to convey the same meaning as sentential negation. And we seem to have to put some emphasis on the participle. So if we look at sentences in 33, ela não tem vivido bem ultimamente, which is the simple negation, we can even say ela não tem vivido, não, we can have this clitic, não tem vivido bem ultimamente. But when you have the noun between the auxiliary and the non-inflected verb, ela tem não vivido bem ultimamente. With this low noun, it's strange to have não. Ela tem não vivido bem ultimamente, because it always looks like you are contrasting this kind of life that she has. We're going to come to that later. Now, also there's co-occurrence with sentential negation, so it cannot be the same kind of element, right? Eu também não tenho não concordado com nada. Não diria gostar, não diria gostar, mas não estou não gostando dele. This sentence in B is like this girl is talking about this boyfriend. Não diria gostar, mas não estou não gostando dele. This is what she means. Now, what could be the potential positions for a low noun? We know from the literature that have four different proposed positions for sentential negation has been proposed, beginning with Zanotini in 1997. She proposes that there is neg P1 for sentential negation, neg P2 for presuppositional negative markers with a different morphological appearance, with SPA, neg P with the positive position for negative markers in Piedmontese, name, which always precedes adverb corresponding to always, and neg P for negative markers below always, and this would be no in Milanese. Now, Sopoleto also talks about builds on Zanotini's work and talks about four positions of negation, but then she relates this to the etymological origin of these types of negations. Neg 1 are scalar negative markers, neg 2 are minimizers, like the ones that happens in the Jespersen cycle. Neg 3 is the quantifier phrase, which which arises from nada, for example, or niente. And neg4 are the focus markers that carry emphasis as the polarity item no, the polarity yes, no. Now, she groups them in a split neg-p base generated within VP. Now, there's also a more recent proposal by the clerk 2013. She works in a nanosyntax approach. And the interesting thing is that she notices that there are syncretisms in negative markers in different languages. And negative markers can be arranged in a paradigm that restricts syncretisms to contiguous cells. So this syncretism, these different types of negations can be arranged in this paradigm. And she distinguishes these 4 different types of negation, 4 different categories of negative markers based on their function, their semantics, their scope, and the differences in the possibility of stackability. But she concentrates on instances of neg-p as a base-generated projection on the main adjectival predicate in copular constructions. So she just analyzes copular constructions. So the classification that she gives is you would have a negative polarity marker, which would mark the sentential scope. Like, and she's not happy, is she? Focus markers, which would scope over untensed predicates. She's not happy, isn't she? Or degree markers, then we scope over gradable predicate terms. She's non-professional. And then quantity markers, which would be Q-neg, like this in prefixes, like This is the lowest scope. She is unhappy. Now, she notices that several languages have different paradigms. So in some of them, you have syncretisms in all of the forms, like Czech, but in others, you don't, like Greek, right? And we will see that in Brazilian Portuguese, we have syncretism in these 3 first forms of negations. So what she proposes is that the negative nanospine is inserted as a complex constituent in the specifier of neg-p. This split neg-p is base generated on a lexical predicate. So it's a predicate negator. And here, above adjective phrase or VP phrase, but she doesn't talk about VP. She just talks about adjective phrases. And then you have this functional projections that are merged above, and the negative spine here all have uninterpretable polarity features, but valued as negative. And these functional projections up here have interpretable, for example, polarity or focus or degree, but they are unvalued. So there are several negation interpretable features in the clause, but this does not lead to multiple interpretations for negation because there's just one feature in neg, which is interpretable for negation. The other interpretable features in the spine are scope features, for example, polarity and etc. And these features will get syntactic value for negation by agree or by agree, as we will see, but semantically interpretable for scope. And so they will be interpretable for Q scope, DEG scope, and Fox scope. In an affirmative sentence, the scope's positions can be filled by affirmative constituents. Now, since Brazilian Portuguese, as I said, there is some syncretism this low no, and low no does not correspond to sentential negation as we've seen before. Let's zoom in on sentential negation in the clerk's framework. So what about FOC neg? Remember, she's considering only gradable adjectives, and she says that FOC neg arises over DEG-P. So it's merged and probes into VP, locates the set of features of VP, and agrees with it. And then it gets valued for negation, and it becomes interpretable and valued. And then the uninterpretable feature of FOC gets checked and deleted. Since for her, FOC-P also has an EPP property, then the whole thing will move up. And then POL-P will get merged later at a stage, and its interpretable feature cannot be valued. But since there is no feature left in the negative spine, because there's no pole in the negative spine, the feature will get the affirmative value. So this is what happens for she is not happy, but sad. NP3, NP2, and NP1, and 1P was generated here, then moves up here, and because of the APP feature, but it gets the evaluation of these uninterpretable features earlier. Now, what about DAG-neg? For her, DAG-neg, or degree negation markers take scope in a degree phase, which Corver proposes is one of the two functional projections in the extended projection of gradable adjectives. And they scope over the predicate term and not over the entire untensed predicate. So in a sentence like she's very non-professional, this means she's very not professional, not that she's not very professional. And so it necessarily involves the presence of these features, and sometimes but not necessarily, this probe, DAG probe, appears in the clause spine. So it arises when the negative sequence consists of these two layers and in the presence of gradable adjective predicates. So the same thing happens. N2 and NP are generated here, and they get valued here, and everything is good for the relation of she is non-professional. Now, it's important to notice that in the presence of non-gradable adjective predicates, for example, geographical in a sentence, so from a geographical point of view, a single vehicle or a flock of birds is a non-geographical feature. She says that in this case, the QP and DAGP do not project, and then as a consequence, negative and uninterpretable DAG features cannot be checked against an uninterpretable head, because there's no head there. But then there's no crash in the derivation, because she argues that negative and uninterpretable but valued features can simply be deleted. Now remember that we noticed that in Brazilian Portuguese there is syncretism in negative markers. We can say that there is pol-neg, eu não tenho comido chocolate, foc-neg, eu tenho comido não chocolate, mas peras, dag-neg, eu tenho sido um cantor não profissional, even q-neg, eu tenho sido infeliz. But low-não is different from sentential negation. So it could be either foc-negation or dag-negation, degree negation. Eu tenho não comido chocolate, mais peras, e eu tenho não comido chocolate, as we saw, right? So what is this, foc-neg or dag-neg? Remember that the clerk considers predicate adjectives in popular constructions, but we now are treating low-no, which appears in periphrastic constructions, which involves auxiliary plus a verb and non-finite verb. So first question is low-no foc-neg? Foc-neg has some properties. They take scope over a low focus phrase, a projection which dominates VP, little VP. Consequently, they do not take scope over the tense predicate, and their scope is restricted to untense predicate. And we have seen that one of its properties is emphasis, because it's felt as an emphatic constructions with emphasis all now. Eu tenho não lido o jornal ultimamente? Tenho. Eu não tenho lido o jornal ultimamente, tenho. But if you have a tag, for example, you have to say, eu tenho não lido o jornal ultimamente, não tenho. It's difficult to say, eu tenho não lido jornal ultimamente, não tenho. So it feels like 41B is like a affirmative sentence. It's not negative in this sense. Now, the second property is that there is no denial of a proposition previously asserted, but modification on contrast. This is what she says about foc-neg, that it's ambiguous. Sometimes it has a modifying function, as in 42A, a not very happy man, or not long ago, and sometimes it's contrastive. It says, John was not happy, but sad. Now, in Brazilian Portuguese, this is exactly what you know does. It does not deny a proposition, but it can modify. So, for example, in 43A, tenho tentado a todo custo não pensar no futuro, fingir que vai continuar tudo mesmo, ignorar o que está por vir. Tenho não vivido todo esse tempo. So here, the person is modifying this vivido. It doesn't mean morrido. It means that it's a different kind of viver, right? Now, the contrast in 43B. Do momento em que me alistei, o fiz para parar das coisas. E aqui estou não fazendo nada, escolhendo não fazer nada. So it's contrasting what he has wanted to do, but now he's not doing it, right? Okay, so these are the properties that we could assign to noun as a focal neg. But what about dag neg? Because it's syncretic, right? In her work, she attaches this dag neg, the degree negation, to gradable adjectives and participles. And in Brazilian Portuguese, we also have this dag neg, because it also can attach to adjectives and participles. So, for example, in 44A, sob a alegação de ser lento, não confiável e parcial, we have an adjective, a gradable adjective. Ao jogar dado não viciado e numerado de 1 a 6, then also we have a participle here, and this viciado, it can be more or less. There is a gradable scale for viciado. Now, dag não is also used as a prefix and has been studied in morphological works on Brazilian Portuguese. Não plus and seems to be a recent construction. It seems to be considered a neologism by some people. Can appear with or without a hyphen. And some authors think they are sort of an adjective, like they modify. And there is also a discussion on its prefix status, whether it's a prefix or not. There is some diachronic work which shows that, for example, this não plus now is a recent innovation, let's say, right? From, say, 19th century on, while the other ones increase also with participle and adjectives also increase their participation in Brazilian Portuguese. So this now does not elicit the same kind of negation as this in, which are not dag, neg. And they may signal absence, lack, opposition, refuse, abstention, and fail, whereas this and in signals contrary action and attaches to adjectives. And even there is this paper by Figueiredo Silva and Mioto that says that não is active in syntax because it cannot occur in a negative word, together with a negative word as ninguém. Considero João, it can appear, sorry. Considero João não fiel a ninguém. You cannot say considero João infiel a ninguém. So it shows that it's not Q neg, it's higher, let's say, if we assume the clerk's spine. So, but now we are talking about participles and gerunds. So if they are not probably non-gradable predicates, we don't know exactly what they are exactly in my research. But in Brazilian Portuguese, English, Spanish, French, não may also attach to nouns. For example, as in this verbal noun, diante do não pagamento da dívida. So since these are not gradable adjectives or participles, I will call this kind of thing, kind of negation, as non-dag, because for lack of a better name, right? I'm just going to say they are not they are not gradable, but they appear with nouns. And besides the verbal nouns, we also find não with common nouns. O não livro, o contos e poesias nunca lidos para leitores que nunca lerão. This is the title of a book. Mas, na verdade, o pessoal acabou lotando o Salão Nobre para descobrir que se trata de um não estudo. As empresas de transporte particular de passageiros, por aplicativo, não enviaram os seus dados. So everybody was there for a study, and in the end, there was a não estudo, because there was no material. And it can stack over the Q neg. And so it means that they belong to different groups. Now is not the same kind of thing as Q neg. Que a negociação do empregado constitua ato de concorrência ou ainda que não desleal seja prejudicial ao serviço. So low no expresses contrast and modification, as we have seen, and it attaches to uninflected verbal forms in periphrases, past participle and present participle in this presentation. So can we assume low no corresponds to a pure neg position in the clause spine, or that is in a situation in which not QP and dag P do not project in the clause spine, since they are no gradable forms as proposed by the clerk. So what is the position of low no? So at this point, I'm just throwing my hypothesis here. I still have to go and look for further evidence in one way or in one way or the other. So if it's low So if slow now is foc neg, it's an instance of foc, low focus, right, in the left periphery, in the low left periphery. In order to account for low verb movement in Brazilian Portuguese, then we must assume that focus P, this foc NFP, which is in the low left periphery, will merge above asp in the language, because we will have verb movement to aspect, and noun appears on top of the verb. In fact, it has been argued in the literature that foc P and top P in the low left periphery are merged above SP, above aspectual phrase in some languages. For example, in Arabic, there are these two papers that argue for different reasons, mainly because of word order, that foc P, low foc P, top P have to be merged above asp. For English, Ramshan, following an event semantics account, proposes that the following structures for progressive and perfective periphrases respectively. So for her, B, passive or progressive B, is generated here inside event P, but have imperfective periphrases is generated above SP. But for Brazilian Portuguese, and given the properties of perfect tenses in the language, which were already pointed out by Jordan Fianese in 1997, I propose, because they are different from English, the perfect periphrases in Brazilian Portuguese are different from the ones in English, I propose that not only star, because we don't have ser here, we have the star, but also ter will be merged in the lower domain inside event P. And then the lexical verbs get their suffix NDO and DO inside the event P. And then if both ter and star are merged inside the event P, then if we follow our assumption, semantic properties of these two periphrases should be similar in Brazilian Portuguese. And in fact, this seems to be the case because there is this dissertation by Ronald Bellini Mendes that compared these two periphrases in Brazilian Portuguese, contemporary Brazilian Portuguese, star plus gerúndio and ter plus participio, and proposed that they can be analyzed as variants of a verb in abovian terms because they all express the durative meaning, and it's a very interesting dissertation. So the proposal would be that if the slow noun is foc neg, the auxiliaries ter and star are merged inside the event P, and then they move to check temporal features in T. In VP, there has been loss of lexical verb movement, which has been argued elsewhere, and the lexical verb movement moves only to asp. So I assume these recent proposals in periphrastic tenses for periphrastic tenses in Brazilian Portuguese, as Araújo Adriano 2022, and Araújo Adriano and myself in preparation, or the things that we are going to present tomorrow, where both auxiliaries and lexical verbs are merged inside the verbal domain. Now, since foc neg is merged above aspect phrase in Brazilian Portuguese, low noun will remain between the auxiliary and the lexical verb, which is in asp. So this would be the proposal. We'll have for eu estou vendo e estou não vendo, eu tenho não feito. So we will have foc neg P here, above asp, the verb starts here, gets the suffix here. I'm following Ramshan's rationale, her proposal, and then estou is merged here, and then estou moves here, and then the verb moves here, and now this low noun is here, and then we have what we have. Now, what about the other position, the other alternative, if low noun is non-dag noun, non-gradable negation? Then QP and DAG-P are not projected according to the clerk. So the proposal is that low noun attaches to gerunds and participles, that is the non-finite form of a lexical verb in event P, inside event P. And then if low noun is affix-like, if it's just like it's very low and it cannot be stranded, this whole complex will move up to asp P in Brazilian Portuguese, and then the auxiliary moves up as usual. So then the difference would be that neg P would be in merged here, and this would be no neg non-DEG because it's just not gradable and it's not doesn't have QP and DEG-P is not projected, and then the rest is the same. Vir, it comes here, arises here, then gets the suffix here, and then noun is here, and then the auxiliary is here, moves up, and then the whole thing, noun, vendo, moves up here. Well, we have to find other evidence, but there is evidence that non-DEG-P may attach to verb plus finite, because in Lithuanian, a similar construction with no attached to the past participle is possible when negation attached to the non-finite lexical verb is used in cases where there is a result of no participation in an event. So this is example for I have not slept, but then it is different when you have which is the negation before the auxiliary. It has this different meaning in the language. And interestingly, later, Fábricas and Rodrigues, González Rodrigues, I changed it here, explained the differences in the position of no between Spanish and Lithuanian by proposing that when negation follows an auxiliary verb, it is merged in a neg phrase placed below SP. Both the negation and the participle are built within the event domain. So it would be here, right? Below event P, it would be exactly the same thing. Now, the question is, why is low noun possible in Brazilian Portuguese, but not in other languages, related languages? This is what I have to answer. And then the answer, I will try to show that it's due to diachronic change, because we have loss of verb movement in analyzation in Brazilian Portuguese. We are going to talk about this tomorrow. And also because it seems, when you look at the properties of this noun in the literature that study this under a morphological approach, this noun has the same properties as low noun, like expressing contradiction and not contrary action, and so it may have there may have been an extension of non-DEG noun for this new noun. So this is the conclusion. I described the occurrences of a new form of negation in Brazilian Portuguese. I proposed an analysis based on the idea already present in the literature for multiple positions for negation. It's an analysis that is not finished. It's just like I'm looking at different possibilities, but more evidence I have to adduce here. And then I have hypothesizes on these possible structures. There are many remaining questions, theoretical questions. For example, is the action start of lexical verbs relevant for the possibility of low noun? Because for inhibited eventualities, this is the case. And I have briefly looked, and I found that there is a difference between the possibilities of noun depending on the action start of lexical verbs, but I haven't. I didn't bring any examples here because I'm still looking at this. In Brazilian Portuguese, is there an interaction between this type of position or type of position of a negation with the other three types of negation that we have, which seem to be all sentential negation, not really this kind of negation, but I haven't checked if you can have all of them together. How can a progressive and aspectual periphrases with infinitives that allow low noun be analyzed for Brazilian Portuguese? Because we have to look at this not progressive perspective periphrases still, just looking at that. And then also diachronic questions. Is there a time correlation for the loss of complex predicates, as I have proposed before, and the appearance of low noun? Is there a diachronic relationship between the appearance of noun and the possible occurrence of inhibited eventualities, and how are these inhibited eventualities occurring in the data in Brazilian Portuguese? And what is the relationship of the possibility of noun and the findings in Bellini in this 2005? Because, as I said, these have been analyzed as variables, variants of a variable in Lavovian times. So this is it. Thank you.
Ok. Obrigado, Sônia, pela sua fala. Perguntas e comentários podem ser feitos no chat. A Cida já colocou aqui o comentário de que ela não produz o não baixo, né, nos complexos verbais, talvez pela faixa etária.
Yeah, what I used was, you see, data from the internet, Twitter, and Google, and because I see that, I know that people use these forms, but we just don't pay attention when we use them. But this is common. So in order to show that this is really the case, I looked for data in the internet and the context also. Yes, also can be age.
O Renato tem comentário.
Well, Renato, what is the relationship between low FOC neg-P and the lattice low FOC P? I, up to now, haven't really studied that in deeply, but I've seen literature that relates this with word order, for example, in Arabic, that when they show not FOC neg-P, but focalization being above the aspect, and this is related to word order. I haven't think of any reason why this should be the case. That there should be a relationship between the lattice low FOC and my and the clerks actually call low FOC. And spec FOC neg-P potentially hosts focalized negative elements. That's what I'm thinking, because I think we can, and we have to focalize these elements, right? I think you can say something like, as I said, having the examples. Eu estou aqui, eu me propus a fazer alguma coisa, mas agora estou aqui eu estou não fazendo. I think it has to be focused. So I'm more prone to this idea that it's more focus and neg-P than really a lower negation. But I still have to look at this, right? And you ask, why is it a type of FOC P and just neg-P? Well, this is just because I'm following the syncretism and that is under the nanosyntax proposal by the clerk. And I think it is really interesting. I mean, if you compare like Brazilian Portuguese with the other languages that have different positions for negation, and there's no syncretism, I think this makes sense just because of that up to now. But thanks for the questions.
Mais as pessoas estão aqui dando os parabéns com as palminhas. Tem mais Jairo, né, perguntando se o neg baixo sofreu neg raising.
I haven't tested that yet, Jairo, but I will have to look at that. Mm-hmm. And not test that only with my intuitions. I always try to look to see whether this is maybe found somewhere, because sometimes the intuitions are really not so believable, let's say. So still have to look at this. Thank you, Renato.
Ok.
Yes, indeed.
Muito obrigado, Sônia, pela sua apresentação mais uma vez, por participar sempre com a gente nas atividades de gramática gerativa. Você é uma figura muito importante na nossa área e é muito bom te ouvir.
Obrigada.
Vou copiar aqui.
Eu é que agradeço a oportunidade de estar falando sobre esse tema, que estou começando a trabalhar, é o meu projeto agora dos próximos 4, 5 anos. Mas, assim, agradeço também pela oportunidade de estar aqui, né, junto, manejando o Jairo e a Ruth, que são tão queridos para mim. Obrigada, Carlos.
Obrigado, Sônia. Vou copiar aqui no chat o link da próxima conferência, que é a minha. Eu costumo não falar nos eventos que eu organizo, mas por um acidente do percurso eu vou precisar falar. Então, então a gente começa daqui a pouquinho. Opa, não dei, mas... Foi. Até daqui a pouquinho.